Good afternoon, everyone, especially to our professor, Dr. Marie-Joy Alit, and my classmates in rural and urban development. My assigned topic is to choose a case study related to industrial development applied in the Philippines or other countries. The case study that I chose is entitled Philippine Readiness for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, a case study by Kim Junmo, Ador Arterneo, and Shung Bomyang in January 2019. Right before I start, I'll introduce myself first. I'm Maria Hazel Artexon, and I am a MAED Bio student from Cebu Technological University. So for the case study key points, we have the literature review, analysis, and of course the concluding notes. For the literature review, it would talk about the Internet of Things, those existing studies or the case studies or even researches that has already been done in terms of the Internet of Things, robotics, AI and automation, big data, and platform effect. And for the analysis, it will provide insights to possible participation and implication of the Fourth Industrial Revolution or FIR in the Philippines. And for the concluding notes, of course, it would answer a conclusion. It would answer the question, or it will provide a conclusion on as to how ready are the developing countries, particularly the Philippines, to go through FIR or Fourth Industrial Revolution. So first is let's try to define what does industrial revolution mean. So industrial revolutions take place when a new means of production introduces drastic changes to the spheres of economics, politics, business, and society. So there has already been 3 industrial revolutions that has happened over the history. So we're calling it as Industry 1.0, Industry 2.0, Industry 3.0, and lastly at present, we're calling it as Industry 4.0. Sorry. So, what is Fourth Industrial Revolution or FIR? We're calling it also as Industry 4.0. It is characterized by a range of new technologies that are fusing the physical, digital, biological worlds, impacting all disciplines, economies, and industries, and even challenges about what it means to be human. That's according to Schwab in 2016. So, Industry 4.0 is, the examples of what we call as FIR or Industry 4.0 would include ubiquitous mobile supercomputing, intelligent robots, self-driving cars, neurotechnological brain enhancements, and even genetic editing or genetic engineering. Excuse me. Sorry. So this case study explores how the Fourth Industrial Revolution or the FIR affects developing countries, specifically in the case of the Philippines. It presents an alternative account to the claim that the world is ready to enter the Fourth Industrial Revolution. But the question is, how will FIR affect the developing world? Knowing that this industrial revolution is or was initially conceived with the developed industrialized rich countries, right? So according to the authors, there's understandably lack of research on this as to how will the FIR affect the developing countries or those countries on what they say or what they call as the global south, and that would include our country, of course. As we all know, the world today has inequality in terms of the distributions of wealth, productivity, and even technology, right? So it is therefore reasonable to expect that the FIR, or the fourth industrial revolution, will also affect the world in an uneven manner. Just like how different these developing countries participated in the industrial revolutions that has happened in the past. Excuse me. So, like the previous industrial revolution, the new mode of production in the FIR transformed many industries. And examples of it would be the Internet of Things, robotics, AI and automation, big data, and the platform effect. So let's have first the Internet of Things. It is the foundation for CPS, or cyber physical systems, wherein it is a communication between the machines as well as between system of machines, and its operator has become advanced enough to constitute a dialogue between the two. That's according to Brettel and Friedrich Keller and Rosenberg in 2014. So it would create what we call as smart factories, and these smart factories will become the new standard in the global manufacturing, a global shift in manufacturing, which we call as the industry 4.0. So another one is robotics, AI, and automation. This will also play a significant part in the upcoming future, which of industrialization, or in the industrial revolution 4.0. That's according to Ross in 2016 and Schwab in 2016 as well. So there's a proposition, or there's a prediction that robotics, artificial intelligence, or AI, and automation would replace humans in working environments. So as an effect, it would create a crisis in employment, and subsequently it would lead to increased inequality, of course. And as a result, a decreased opportunities for developing countries to offer low cost labor. So that's according to Schwab in 2016. So it's just like a domino effect when it comes to the development or the usage of these things, the robots, AI, and automation. So it has a negative impact, most particularly to developing countries, which offer low cost human labor, right? Labor force, I mean. Big data is another trend that will drastically change the socio-political landscape of the future. And it is the use of large quantities of information to increase the effectiveness of decision making in a variety of contexts. It usually exhibits veracity, variability, and value, according to Gandumi and Hyder in 2015. A good example of this is um, which ads should be shown to a particular user based on his internet activity. If you have observed that, I have even experienced that myself. How come would ads appear with my in alignment or in relation with my current or recent internet activity? For example, I would research about baby foods, for instance, and there would be ads which would show sellers having those let's say having those baby materials for feeding a baby, or even those pre-prepared foods. So that's an example of this one, big data. So recommending items to consumer or to customer based on his previous purchases, or even based on his or her recent internet activity, deciding to which advertisements should be shown to a particular user. So next is the platform effect. Platforms such as Alibaba, Amazon, and Google are growing at the expense of small businesses, according to Schwab in 2016 and Sneesec in 2017. So these companies, these big companies, are increasing their scope. They are expanding and at the expense of those small businesses. So they are monopolizing and they are very invulnerable when it comes to changes with the prices, or when it comes to new competitors, for example, that would be opening, or new small businesses that would open. For example, aside from that concept, is that these big companies would expand, or would go to another business venture, just like, for instance, we have Google, which was once only a search engine company, right? But right now they are already expanding into business of car manufacturing. So scholars call this effect as the platform effect. Okay, so let's move on to the analysis. So FIR, let's talk about FIR, or the fourth industrial revolution in our country, the Philippines. Unlike the developed countries, manufacturing and industrial sectors are relatively small and underdeveloped, contributing to only around 21 to 23% of the GDP. When it comes to to developing countries, most particularly to our country, which is the Philippines. So, um, manufacturing and industrial sectors is, of course, just a very small portion of the gross domestic production, or the GDP. Another point is that although there have been ups and downs during the recent decade as of 2012, however, the high technology export volume of the Philippines has reached to a level comparable to that of Ireland. As you can see there, on my current slide, the pattern is quite similar when we compare it in terms of high technology export volume. It's our export volume is already comparable with that of Ireland, which is a developed country in the European Union. As you can see there, the blue line is the Philippines, and the red segmented line is the Ireland. However, it's worth noting that such exports are still relatively low. So even if those the chart that I have shown in the previous slide is quite in the good light, there's also it's also worth noting that manufacturing and industry comprise a smaller share of the Philippine economy relative to the services sector. So as you can see there in the table in my current slide, industry would take only 17.1%. When you compare it with the services sector, that's, I think, times 3 or even more. So for the services, it's 54.6%. So it simply shows that um, the Philippine economy is dominated with the service sector, unlike with those countries, with other countries that that underwent first with a period of transition from agriculture to industries and manufacturing, followed by the transition to services. Our country from agriculture just expanded right away with the services sector. So that's actually one notable feature of the Philippine economy, the dominance of the service sector. So as of 2017, according to Philippine Statistics Authority, in 2018, so would uh services would have 57.5% of the GDP. Meanwhile, industry is only 34%. And industrialized and knowledge-based economies, as we all know, would have these new exciting technologies and the promises of AI, and robotics and automation. So it's quite exciting to think about this in terms of those rich countries, those industrialized countries. But when we talk about AI, robotics, and automation in the developing countries, that's actually considered as a potential threat according to the authors. Why? Because as we all know, the competitive advantage of the Philippines is that we have a large pool of young, well-educated labor force and low labor costs rather than technology. A good example of this is the IT BPO industry. We have the in here in our country, we have the ability to supply high quality and low cost outsourced front and back end services to overseas clients, most particularly to those developed countries overseas, just like the US and the Europe. But the Philippine IT BPOs engaged in services that can be automated or be transferred to AI or artificial intelligence are therefore vulnerable to displacement. So those call centers, human resources, accounting, and payroll outsourcing as examples of IT BPO industries that could possibly be automated or transferred to AI would possibly be replaced with AI, right? So there's so that simply means that talking about fourth industrial revolution, these exciting technologies here in our country, in particular in the developing countries, that's actually considered as a potential threat, knowing that our competitive advantage with the developed countries is that we are providing these developed countries a large pool of young, well educated human labor force. But there according to the case study, it's included there that there are already many companies resorting to AI, machine learning, and robotic and automation to cut down further cost in terms of labor costs. So for the concluding notes, the fourth industrial revolution, or FIR, claims regarding the world-changing effects of emerging technologies do not sufficiently take into account the role of the developing world. So it just simply visions or simply visualizes the developed countries, developed rich countries in the global north. So the question there is, what about the developing countries, or those poor countries just like the Philippines? How will these countries participate in the fourth industrial revolution, knowing, as I've excuse me, that as I have explained in the previous slide, knowing that this industrial revolution is actually considered as a possible threat, most particularly to low cost labor force. So, describing the current political economic state of the world, it only describes the current political economic state of the world according to the capabilities of the developed world, without even stressing the corresponding reliance of the developed world to the developing world in terms of material and labor. So, with that with those statements, the author have concluded that developing countries, just like the Philippines, will not go through fourth industrial revolution in the same way the developed countries do, given their different economic context and limited access to technological advances. So it is reasonable to expect that the Philippines will participate in the FIR, or in the fourth industrial revolution, in a different, possibly unpredictable manner, particularly if reshoring does take place and cheap labor can no longer be used by developing countries as an avenue for advancement. Because as I've said a while ago, that's one of our avenues for advancements, or one of our competitive advantage is to offer cheap labor, right? To developed countries just like the US and the Europe. So that's the concluding notes as stated by the authors of this case study. Okay, so these are my references. And that's all for my report. Thank you for listening, everyone, and have a great day.